More than a century after the Russian Empire disappeared, the Romanov name continues to provoke a remarkably simple question. Who inherited the dynasty? If the empire had not fallen, who might have occupied the throne after Nicholas II? And where are the people connected to that succession living today? At first, the answer appears straightforward. Grand Duchess Maria Vladimirovna presents herself as the head of the Russian Imperial House. Born in Madrid and publicly associated with Spain for much of her life, she descends in the male line from Emperor Alexander II. Her only son, George Mikhailovich, is recognized by her supporters as the next dynastic heir. But the Romanov story is not governed by one uncontested family tree. Other descendants of the imperial dynasty reject Maria's claim or dispute the interpretation of the succession laws upon which it depends. Some belong to the Romanov Family Association, an organization connecting descendants of several surviving branches. These relatives may regard themselves as members of the historical Romanov family without claiming that Russia should restore its monarchy or recognize a single pretender. The disagreement begins with a distinction often lost in popular accounts. A descendant is someone genealogically related to the imperial family. A dynast is someone who qualifies under the former house laws. A claimant asserts a right to lead the former imperial house. A family association represents living relatives, but does not necessarily determine succession. And a legal heir would need recognition from an existing political system, something no modern Romanov possesses in the Russian Federation. The title of emperor did not operate like an ordinary private inheritance. It could not simply be passed to the closest relative through a will. Before the revolution, succession was regulated by imperial laws involving birth order, sex, religion, and the status of marriages. After the monarchy collapsed, those rules became subjects of historical and family interpretation rather than enforceable constitutional law. The surviving Romanovs are now distributed across several countries. Their lives have unfolded in Spain, France, Britain, Italy, Denmark, Switzerland, the United States, and Russia. Some participate in charities, memorial ceremonies, or organizations dedicated to Russian history. Others live largely private lives, connected to the dynasty by ancestry rather than by public ambition. Finding the Romanov heirs today therefore requires more than identifying one person and one residence. It requires following the dynasty through revolution, execution, escape, exile, and a century of disagreements about what imperial succession could mean after the empire itself had vanished. 1. Why Nicholas II left no direct descendants. The most common misunderstanding about the modern Romanovs begins with Nicholas II. People searching for the heir of the last Tsar sometimes expect to find a grandson or great-granddaughter living anonymously somewhere in Europe. No such direct descendant exists. Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra had 5 children: Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei. None married, and none had children. After Nicholas abdicated in March 1917, the family was held under increasingly restrictive conditions. In July 1918, Nicholas, Alexandra, and their children were killed in Yekaterinburg. Their deaths ended the direct family line of Russia's last reigning emperor. Claims that Anastasia or another child escaped became famous in popular culture, but investigations of the remains and genetic evidence resolved the central historical question. The immediate family did not produce a surviving branch. This does not mean that every Romanov died. The imperial dynasty was an extended network containing uncles, aunts, cousins, and more distant relatives of Nicholas II. Some escaped from territories controlled by the revolutionaries. Others were already outside Russia when the political order collapsed. Several grand duchesses married into European, royal, or aristocratic families, while male-line princes established households abroad. The surviving relatives descended from earlier emperors or from collateral branches. Grand Duchess Maria Vladimirovna, for example, is not a descendant of Nicholas II. Her line reaches Emperor Alexander II through his son, Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich, then through Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich and Grand Duke Vladimir Kirillovich. Members of the Romanov Family Association descend through other branches. Princess Olga Andreevna Romanov comes from the line of Grand Duke Michael Nikolaevich, a son of Nicholas I. She is also descended from Grand Duchess Xenia Alexandrovna, Nicholas II's sister. This makes her a relative of the last Tsar, but not his direct descendant. The difference matters because phrases such as the descendants of Nicholas II and the descendants of the Romanov dynasty are not interchangeable. Nicholas left no descendants, while the dynasty's extended family survived through his relatives. It also explains why no living person can inherit Nicholas II's position merely by being his closest biological relative. The throne was not a personal possession transferred like a house or bank account. Succession depended on the imperial house as a legal institution, not solely on proximity to the last monarch. When the revolution abolished that institution, the remaining relatives inherited memories, family documents, personal property, and cultural responsibilities. They did not inherit sovereignty over Russia. From that moment onward, the question of the heir became separated from the machinery of the state that once gave the title practical meaning. This is the first essential conclusion. There is no hidden grandson of Nicholas II waiting to be discovered. The modern Romanov question concerns collateral relatives and competing interpretations of a succession system that no longer has constitutional force. 2. How the Romanovs survived the revolution. The survival of the wider Romanov family was neither orderly nor guaranteed. After the collapse of the monarchy, imperial relatives found themselves scattered across a landscape of revolution and civil war. Some were killed. Others fled south toward Crimea, crossed borders under dangerous conditions, or relied on relatives in foreign royal families. A significant group gathered in Crimea, where the changing military situation temporarily spared them from the fate of relatives held elsewhere. Among them was Dowager Empress Maria Feodorovna, the mother of Nicholas II. In 1919, she and several family members departed aboard the British warship HMS Marlborough. That evacuation became one of the decisive moments in the survival of the dynasty. It preserved branches that later established themselves in Western Europe. Britain, France, and Denmark became important centers for Romanov exiles. Other relatives built lives in Italy, Switzerland, Germany, and the United States. Exile transformed the meaning of the family name. Before 1917, members of the Imperial House occupied positions within a political and ceremonial hierarchy supported by the Russian state. Abroad, those structures disappeared. Titles might be recognized socially by relatives or monarchist circles, but they no longer provided public office, government income, or authority over Russian institutions. The change was not merely financial. The Romanovs had to redefine their identities. Some remained closely involved with émigré organizations and the Russian Orthodox Church. Others served in foreign militaries, entered professional careers, married outside royal circles, or deliberately withdrew from dynastic controversy. Women of Romanov descent became part of other European families through marriage. Their descendants could possess an entirely authentic genealogical connection to the Russian emperors while carrying different surnames and national identities. This expanded the number of people related to the dynasty, but it did not automatically place all of them in a former Russian succession. Male line descendants preserved the Romanov name in several branches, though disputes arose over whether their parents' marriages had met the standards of the old imperial laws. A person could therefore be an undisputed Romanov relative, but disputed as a dynast. This complexity is one reason the family cannot be represented accurately by a simple list moving from Nicholas II to a single modern successor. The dynasty, after 1917, became a network. One branch emphasized strict legal continuity. Other branches emphasized family connection and collective memory. Still, others avoided the entire question. Geography reinforced that fragmentation. Children born in exile were educated in different languages and became citizens of different countries. Their relationship with Russia was often cultural, religious, or emotional rather than based on lived experience inside the country. After the Soviet Union ended, some descendants began visiting Russia more openly. They attended memorials, religious ceremonies, museum events, and the burial of identified members of Nicholas II's family in St. Petersburg in 1998. These visits represented historical reconciliation, but they did not restore the dynasty as a governing institution. The Romanovs, therefore, survived in two different senses. They survived biologically because collateral relatives had children. They survived symbolically because the name remained connected to Russian history, Orthodox tradition, and public memory. What did not survive was the imperial state that once regulated their ranks and transformed succession into law. 3. The succession laws behind the modern dispute. To understand why Maria Vladimirovna's claim is accepted by some and rejected by others, it is necessary to examine the old rules of the Russian Imperial House. Emperor Paul I established a more systematic succession order in 1797. The purpose was to reduce the uncertainty and palace struggles that had marked earlier transfers of power. In broad terms, succession favored male descendants according to primogeniture. Women could enter the succession under specified circumstances when eligible male lines had become extinct. Religion was important. The emperor was inseparable from the institutional role assigned to orthodoxy in the Russian Empire. Membership in the imperial house and eligibility for succession were therefore connected to religious requirements. Marriage was equally decisive. Members of the dynasty were expected to obtain imperial approval before marrying. More controversially, the spouse was generally expected to belong to a ruling or formerly ruling house of corresponding status. A marriage that failed the equality requirement could be considered morganatic. In such a marriage, the relationship itself might be legally recognized, but the spouse and children would not necessarily receive the husband's dynastic rank or succession rights. This distinction later became the center of the Romanov conflict. As the exiled generations married members of aristocratic or non-royal families, the number of descendants who unquestionably satisfied the strictest interpretation of the house laws diminished. The surviving family did not stop existing, but the category of eligible dynasts became increasingly narrow. The supporters of Maria Vladimirovna argue that by the end of her father's life, the other male Romanov lines had been excluded because they descended from marriages that did not meet dynastic requirements. Under this interpretation, Maria's father, Vladimir Kirillovich, became the last eligible male dynast. When he died in 1992, the succession could pass to his daughter. Critics challenge several parts of that reasoning. Some dispute the equality of the marriage between Vladimir Kirillovich and Maria's mother, Princess Leonida Bagration-Mukhrani. Leonida belonged to the historic Georgian Bagration dynasty, but Georgia's political status and the standing assigned to different Bagration branches created a legal historical controversy. If Vladimir's marriage was unequal, critics argue, Maria herself would not possess the eligibility her claim requires. Conversely, Maria's supporters maintain that the Bagrations were a sovereign royal dynasty, and that Leonida's status satisfied the relevant standard. There are further disagreements about Kirill Vladimirovich, Maria's grandfather. After the deaths of Nicholas II, Alexei, and other senior male relatives, Kirill declared himself curator of the throne and later emperor in exile. Supporters regarded him as the senior eligible dynast. Opponents questioned his actions during the revolutionary period and the validity of his assumption of the imperial title. These debates show why genealogy alone cannot settle the matter. Most participants agree on the broad family relationships. They disagree over the legal meaning assigned to marriages, decrees, and historical circumstances. There's also a larger problem. The old laws were created for a functioning empire. Russia is now a republic. No modern Russian constitutional authority applies the Pauline succession rules to select a sovereign. Consequently, even the most sophisticated dynastic argument remains a claim about continuity inside a former house, not an enforceable right to govern the country. The question, who is the heir, therefore has at least two answers. Within Maria Vladimirovna's interpretation, the answer is clear. Within competing interpretations, her claim is disputed, or the old succession may have become incapable of producing an undisputed heir. 4. Maria Vladimirovna and the claim from Madrid. Maria Vladimirovna was born in Madrid on December 23, 1953. She is the only child of Vladimir Kirillovich and Leonida Bagration-Mukhrani. Through the male line, she descends from Emperor Alexander II, making her connection to the imperial dynasty direct and well documented. Her father considered himself the head of the Russian Imperial House. In 1969, he issued a declaration addressing what would happen if the remaining male relatives died before him. The measure anticipated a future in which Maria could assume a central role in maintaining the house's continuity. When Vladimir died in 1992, Maria declared that she had succeeded him as head of the Russian Imperial House. Her supporters used the old succession laws to argue that the eligible male dynasts had become extinct and that the rights of the house had passed to her. The organization representing her position describes her not merely as a Romanov descendant, but as the head of a continuing imperial institution. Its public work includes cultural, religious, historical, and charitable activities. Maria has participated in ceremonies, issued statements, and maintained relationships with Orthodox and civic organizations. Her claim is not recognized as a governmental office by the Russian Federation. Russia does not have a legally restored imperial throne, and Maria exercises no constitutional authority. Her status exists within the traditions and claims of the organization she leads. Where does she live? Public biographies and official records have long associated Maria with Madrid. She was born and educated there, and official communications have repeatedly documented her activities originating in or taking place in the Spanish capital. She has also spent time in other parts of Europe and made numerous visits to Russia. The appropriate level of detail is important. A documentary can responsibly state that Maria is publicly associated with Madrid in Spain. It should not reveal a private address, routine, or real-time location. Her city matters only because it illustrates how the imperial family's institutional claim continued outside Russia. Madrid was not a random refuge. Maria grew up in a European environment connected to other royal families and émigré networks. Her education included Russian history and literature, helping preserve a dynastic identity despite her birth outside the former empire. Her life reveals a central paradox of the modern Romanovs. The person making the most developed claim to lead the Russian Imperial House has spent much of her life in Western Europe. Yet exile is not an exception to the dynasty's modern history. It is one of its defining features. Maria's supporters do not generally present her public mission as an immediate political campaign to replace the Russian Republic. Their emphasis is commonly placed on historical continuity, charity, religion, remembrance, and service. That distinction reduces the claim from a direct contest for political power to a debate over family and institutional identity. Even so, terminology must remain careful. Calling Maria the current Russian empress as an uncontested fact would misrepresent both Russia's constitutional system and the family dispute. Calling her a claimant to the headship, or the head recognized by the Russian Imperial House organization, is more precise. Maria Vladimirovna is therefore one of the clearest answers to the title's question, but not the only answer. She is a documented Romanov dynast, according to the system defended by her supporters, publicly connected with Madrid and active in preserving an imperial tradition. Her leadership, however, is neither universally accepted by all Romanov relatives nor recognized as sovereign authority by the Russian state. 5. George Mikhailovich, the heir to Maria's claim. If Maria Vladimirovna is accepted as head of the Russian Imperial House, her son George Mikhailovich becomes the next central figure. George was born in Madrid in 1981. His father was Prince Franz Wilhelm of Prussia, who converted to Orthodoxy before the marriage and took the name Mikhail Pavlovich. Through his mother, George descends from the Romanov line of Alexander II. Through his father, he descends from the German Imperial House of Hohenzollern. The Russian Imperial House organization describes George as heir and Cesarevich. These titles express its interpretation of the dynastic succession. They do not constitute positions recognized by the government of Russia. George spent parts of his early life in France and Spain. He later studied at Oxford and worked in European institutions and international business. His biography is a vivid example of how former royal descendants adapted to professional life in modern Europe. His work included experience connected with the European Parliament, the European Commission, and private sector organizations. He later established business interests of his own. These activities complicate the popular image of a royal heir waiting passively for a vanished throne. His adult life developed through education, employment, and international networks. George has also participated in public events associated with Russian history and the Orthodox Church. His appearances with Maria reinforce the presentation of an organized house with a head and an heir. To supporters, this continuity demonstrates that the dynasty can survive without exercising political power. In 2021, George married Rebecca Betterini, the daughter of an Italian diplomat, who became known within the house as Victoria Romanovna after entering the Orthodox Church. Their religious wedding in St. Petersburg attracted international attention because it was presented as a major Romanov wedding held in Russia after the Revolutionary era. The event had historical resonance, but it did not carry governmental or constitutional significance. It showed that the Romanov name retained ceremonial power and public fascination. It did not mean that the Russian state had endorsed a restoration. George and Victoria have since formed the next generation of this branch. Public announcements by the Russian Imperial House describe their children within its dynastic terminology. Responsible coverage should avoid unnecessary private details about minors, focusing instead on what the births mean to the continuity claimed by the organization. Where George lives cannot always be reduced to one permanent location without risking oversimplification. His biography has been associated with Madrid, France, Britain, Brussels, and Russia at different stages. Recent official reporting shows sustained family and ceremonial activity connected with Russia, including Moscow, while his background and professional life remain strongly European. The most historically accurate description is that George belongs to a transnational branch of the family with public connections to both Western Europe and Russia. This mobility is itself part of the story. Modern dynastic identity no longer depends on residence in a palace, or even within the borders of the former empire. George's status is also inseparable from his mother's. If Maria's claim is accepted, he is her heir. If her eligibility is rejected, his position is weakened by the same dispute. He does not provide an independent solution to the Romanov controversy. He continues one side of it. That is why a documentary should not present George as the future Tsar of Russia. Such language converts a symbolic dynastic claim into a political prediction for which there is no factual basis. A more accurate statement is that he is the designated successor to Maria Vladimirovna within the Russian Imperial House represented by their organization. George Mikhailovich consequently demonstrates how an imperial inheritance can survive as family identity, ceremony, and cultural activity without becoming state power. He has inherited a claim, not a country. 6. The Romanov Family Association and other descendants. Maria Vladimirovna's branch is only one part of the modern Romanov landscape. Other descendants are connected through the Romanov Family Association, established in 1979 to maintain relationships among members of the extended family and support historical and charitable work. The association includes descendants of several imperial branches. Its existence shows that Romanov family identity is broader than the circle recognizing Maria's claim. Members of the association have historically taken different positions on the succession controversy. Some senior figures opposed Maria's claim. The association itself has emphasized family connection rather than functioning as a government in exile or selecting a ruler for Russia. Princess Olga Andreevna Romanov became one of its most visible representatives. Born in London in 1950, she descends through her father, Prince Andrei Alexandrovich, from Grand Duke Michael Nikolaevich, a son of Emperor Nicholas I. Through her paternal grandmother, Grand Duchess Xenia Alexandrovna, she is also connected closely to Nicholas II's immediate generation. Olga has lived in Britain and has spoken publicly about her family history. Her life contrasts with romantic expectations about exiled royalty. The preservation of an old house and family archive can involve practical, financial, and administrative responsibilities rather than palace ceremony. Other Romanov descendants have lived in Britain, France, Italy, Denmark, Switzerland, and the United States. Some work in art, business, philanthropy, or professions unrelated to dynastic history. Many do not seek public recognition as heirs. One frequently discussed male line descendant is Prince Rostislavovich Romanov. Born in the United States and educated in Britain, he has pursued an artistic career and participated in family organizations and events connected with Romanov history. The presence of living male line descendants might seem to settle the succession in their favor, but the old marriage rules immediately return to the debate. Maria's supporters classify these branches as non-dynastic because of unequal marriages in earlier generations. Members or defenders of the other branches dispute the authority or consistency of that classification. This difference illustrates why male Romanov and eligible dynastic heir are not necessarily synonyms. One is primarily genealogical. The other depends on a legal interpretation of a former imperial system. The Romanov Family Association also provides a different model for preserving the past. Instead of concentrating legitimacy in one head of the house, it creates a network among relatives. Its activities can be understood as those of a family and heritage organization. Neither model is neutral. Maria's organization emphasizes institutional succession. The association emphasizes membership in the surviving family. Each approach preserves a different element of Romanov identity. For viewers, the crucial lesson is that Princess Olga or another association leader should not automatically be called an alternative empress or emperor. The presidency of a family association is an elected organizational role. It is not the same as hereditary headship under imperial law. Similarly, the presence of many descendants does not produce dozens of equally serious claimants. Most Romanov relatives do not actively assert a right to rule Russia. They are descendants of an imperial family living in a republican age. The surviving branches therefore answer the word who in the title, while their international lives answer the word where. The Romanovs are not concentrated in a single palace or country. They exist as a dispersed family connected by genealogy, memory, and occasional collective activity. 7. What modern Russia recognizes and what it does not. The Romanov succession dispute takes place outside the constitutional structure of modern Russia. This fact is sometimes obscured when historical titles are reported without explanation. The Russian Federation is a republic. It has no legal office of Tsar, Emperor, Crown Prince, or Grand Duchess of the Imperial House. No claimant possesses governmental authority by descent from the Romanovs. This does not prevent Russian institutions from interacting with members of the family. Romanov descendants have attended religious ceremonies, memorial events, museum programs, and historical commemorations. Officials and church representatives may receive them with respect connected to their ancestry. Such recognition is social, cultural, or ceremonial. It should not be confused with formal acceptance of succession rights. A meeting with an official does not transform a claimant into a constitutional heir. The treatment of Nicholas II and his family demonstrates this separation. Their remains became subjects of historical, forensic, legal, and religious consideration. The Russian Orthodox Church canonized Nicholas and his family as passion bearers. The Russian state rehabilitated them as victims of political repression. These actions changed their place in public memory, but they did not restore the monarchy. They addressed historical injustice, religious interpretation, and national remembrance. After the Soviet period, the Romanov story returned to public spaces through museums, exhibitions, churches, books, and ceremonies. This created room for descendants to engage with Russia more visibly than had been possible during much of the 20th century. Maria and George have made official style visits organized by their Imperial House. Members of other branches have also returned for commemorations. Each visit can carry emotional and symbolic significance without resolving who would have inherited the throne. The Russian Orthodox Church also occupies a complex position. Religious participation may lend ceremonial dignity to dynastic events, yet this does not necessarily amount to a binding legal judgment about every contested marriage or succession claim. The difference between memory and restoration is vital for educational accuracy. Russia can honor victims of the revolution, preserve imperial palaces, and welcome Romanov descendants while remaining constitutionally republican. Former royal families across Europe often occupy similar spaces. They may lead foundations, protect archives, support charities, or attend public ceremonies. Their historical titles survive in social use, even when their countries no longer grant them political authority. In the Romanov case, the absence of state recognition means that the competing sides cannot appeal to an active imperial court to deliver a final verdict. The emperor, who once approved marriages and interpreted house law, no longer exists. The state that enforced the rules has also disappeared. The disagreement persists partly because there is no universally accepted adjudicator. Each side relies on historical statutes, precedents, family declarations, and its understanding of dynastic legitimacy. Modern Russia therefore recognizes Romanov history far more clearly than it recognizes a Romanov heir. The dynasty is a major part of the national past. Its living descendants are real, its monuments and archives matter, but its succession no longer determines public power. 8. What the Romanov heirs actually inherited. After following the family through execution, exile, and legal controversy, we can finally ask what the living Romanovs inherited. They did not inherit the Russian Empire. Sovereignty is not a private object that can be held indefinitely after a state undergoes revolution and constitutional transformation. Modern Russia does not belong to the descendants of its former rulers. They did not automatically inherit every palace, artwork, or territory once connected with the crown. Much imperial property had belonged to the state or was nationalized after the revolution. Claims involving personal objects or archives must be assessed individually rather than treated as ownership of the imperial system. What the descendants did inherit was a family history of extraordinary scale. That history includes achievement, political responsibility, cultural patronage, war, reform, repression, revolution, and personal tragedy. To carry the Romanov name is to be associated with all of these elements, not merely with jewels and palaces. Maria Vladimirovna inherited her father's institutional claim. George Mikhailovich inherited the position of successor within that same interpretation. Members of the Romanov Family Association inherited connections to other branches and a collective interest in preserving family ties. Different descendants also inherited documents, photographs, personal accounts, and oral memories. These materials can help historians understand exile and the private world behind official court life. They inherited ceremonial roles because the public continues to treat the Romanovs as symbols. Invitations to memorials and historical events arise from that symbolic status. Yet symbolism is not equivalent to government. They inherited a debate over legitimacy that may never produce universal agreement. The controversy is not necessarily evidence of a hidden conspiracy or a missing document. It results from genuinely different readings of laws created for a political order that no longer exists. Most importantly, they inherited the challenge of living ordinary modern lives beneath an extraordinary surname. Education, employment, marriage, and citizenship now shape their daily experience more directly than imperial rank. Where are the Romanov heirs today? Maria Vladimirovna remains publicly associated with Madrid and travels for the activities of the house she leads. George Mikhailovich has lived and worked across several European locations and maintains visible connections with Russia. Other Romanov descendants are found in Britain, continental Europe, the United States, and elsewhere. There is no secret palace where the dynasty waits collectively to return. There's a dispersed family whose members have made different choices about how much of the Romanov legacy to carry into public life. The transformation from imperial court to international family tells us something larger about fallen monarchies. Bloodlines can continue after institutions disappear. Titles can survive socially after they lose legal force. Memory can remain powerful, even when political restoration is neither recognized nor realistically expected. That is the true modern inheritance of the Romanovs. Not an empire, but the unresolved responsibility of interpreting what the empire meant. So, who are the Romanov heirs today? If we follow the position of the organization known as the Russian Imperial House, Grand Duchess Maria Vladimirovna is its current head. She is publicly associated with Madrid, Spain, and has maintained religious, cultural, and charitable connections with Russia. Her son, George Mikhailovich, is recognized by that organization as her heir. If we examine the wider family, however, we find numerous descendants distributed across Britain, Europe, the United States, and Russia. Some participate in the Romanov Family Association. They preserve a legitimate genealogical connection to the dynasty, but do not necessarily accept Maria's authority or present themselves as candidates for a restored throne. The direct line of Nicholas II ended with his children. Modern Romanovs descend from collateral branches of the wider imperial family. That fact alone prevents the story from being reduced to the discovery of a secret son, grandson, or single last heir. The succession dispute centers on the old requirements governing marriage and dynastic eligibility. Supporters of Maria argue that other male lines lost their rights through marriages considered unequal, and that succession properly passed to her. Critics question that conclusion, including the status of the marriage from which Maria herself was born. No existing Russian constitutional institution has resolved the disagreement because Russia no longer possesses an imperial succession. The question survives within history, genealogy, and family tradition, not as a present mechanism for choosing the country's government. The most accurate answer is therefore plural. There are living Romanov descendants. There is a well-organized dynastic claim led by Maria Vladimirovna and continued through George Mikhailovich. There are other branches that preserve the family name and reject or avoid that claim. But there is no universally recognized last heir with a legally enforceable right to the Russian throne. The Romanovs live today not as rulers of one empire, but as citizens and residents of several modern countries. Their lives reveal how a dynasty can survive biologically and symbolically long after losing the institutions that once made its succession politically important. Perhaps that is why the Romanov question continues to fascinate people. It is not simply a story about where former royals live. It is a story about the boundary between ancestry and authority, between historical memory and modern law, and between inheriting a famous name and inheriting the power that name once represented. If you enjoy documentaries that separate royal legend from documented history, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications for our next investigation into the descendants of the world's fallen dynasties. And before you leave, tell us in the comments, from which city or country are you watching, and which former royal family should we investigate next?